Do you see those two weevils, Doctor?
I do.
Which would you choose?
Neither. There's not a scrap of difference between them. They're the same species of curculio.
If you had to choose, if you were forced to make a choice, if there was no other response.
Well, then, if you're going to push me, I would choose the right-hand weevil. It has a significant advantage in both length and breadth.
There, I have you. You're completely dished. Do you not know that in the service, one must always choose the lesser of two weevils?
No.
I like how Reese was using an accent and David wasn't.
Yeah, David, you didn't sound like Paul Bettany at all.
I'm sorry, that's too hard to
Did I sound at all
No,
like
I got
Russ?
it.
Not at all. No.
I understood what you were going for.
I was
but
going with realistic David.
I'm
Realistic
I'm
David.
sure it is
That wasn't even
clearly-
believable.
I'm sure it is
I
clearly
didn't believe it one bit.
clearly obvious that we were portraying both Russell Crowe and Paul Bettany in Master and Commander. Russell Crowe playing Captain Aubrey and Paul Bettany playing
The commander.
the Doctor, who his name starts with an M, and I can't say
Stephen
Muskin
Maturin.
or
Maverick.
something. Yeah.
Maverick, yep.
This week we're covering Master and Commander, a just one film in this that wanted to be more, unfortunately, but did not get its wishes.
Well,
Based on the book's
sorry,
by-
I had a question
Yeah.
about that. Did the director and producers, whatever, did they actually want to make a second movie and it just didn't happen, or did they finish this movie and it just didn't finish throughout the
I think that's
They-
part of the last part of the podcast.
They're actually they
Fine.
did want to continue.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
I don't know about the director for sure, but this
But
was
the
they were aiming to
studio
set
and-
up a franchise of some.
You
Okay.
could tell by the ending that they were definitely leading into a sequel.
Well,
Anyway.
well, it's leads to it, but a lot of things are open-ended.
This is Franchise Killer, podcast where we pick movie franchises or wannabe franchises, review them film by film, and see where things went wrong. Or right.
right.
And this guy over to my right is...
David Paul Bettany.
No.
No, that wasn't even a Paul Bettany.
Do it
I'm
again.
Dave.
Do it again,
All right,
David.
scratch, hold on.
You went David Paul Bettany like a trailer.
Do it again.
Hi, I'm David.
And,
Irina.
and
Noah.
way over there.
Hey, it's AJ.
Cool.
AJ.
Hey.
Hey, Jay.
Responsible for what we're watching this time.
So, y'all ready to talk about Master and Commander?
So, based on the books by Patrick O'Brien,
Yes.
the Aubrey/Maturin series.
Yes. And this one was apparently based off Master and Commander and the book The Far Side of the World, hence the title Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World.
Yep.
So,
We'll get into that.
Where does the
as
colon
part
part
It's
happen?
the
Oh,
subtitle.
when he's doing surgery on
The
that
colon
guy?
is found like in
Master Commander:
intestines.
Keep going with the puns. I see.
colon. The search for
The colon.
The search for the colon.
The Curse of the Black Pearl.
I was trying to reference Tomb Raider.
all right. So on this podcast, we will first get into our history with this movie, if we've seen it or not seen it, our impressions before going into it again for this episode. Then we will break down the story, talk about various plot points and what we thought. And closing out, we will then go into why this franchise failed and whether or not it did well on its own or not, or just basically, yeah, why another one wasn't made. In this
Okay.
one's case, it only got one. So,
Pity.
yeah, it should be an interesting conversation.
Or is it?
I'm going to go over to AJ since he pitched us this movie for this episode. What was your background with this movie going in to this episode?
All right, so starting with very general terms, I've always been a fan of nautical stories in general. Some of my favorite books were, Castaways of the Flying Dutchman, Treasure Island, anything relating to ships. I got familiar quickly with a lot of the jargon, the nautical terms, parts of the ship, just because I read authors that wrote about it and knew about it. Ironically enough, I didn't read Patrick O'Brien until recently, but I've always been drawn to that aspect of the thing, so this is kind of in my wheelhouse, so to speak. And then this movie, also ironically, I heard about because of Iva Davies, who is one of the leads on the soundtrack for this movie. He's
one of the violin or cello players?
No,
or?
so he's actually a lead of an 80s rock group called Ice House.
Oh, never
who
mind.
was kind of a favorite of mine, kind of as a young adult getting into music, just really into 80s rock. And then the Australian band Ice House, he's the lead singer and composer for it. So he was in charge of kind of the score and soundtrack, or getting together a lot of that. It was
Which
a
is
collaborative
amazing.
effort.
Yeah, that's kind of
So
unexpected.
ironically, I wasn't drawn to this movie because of the source material, the books, that kind of thing. It was actually because of his involvement. It's how I first came to know about it, which is kind of funny because I'm a big fan of Russell Crowe. And like I said, just anything nautical in general. And I didn't see it in theaters, even though I wanted to. But that's probably because
I didn't either.
Return of the King was its competitor.
And Pirates of the Caribbean was coming out too, I think.
That was in the summer. The Pirates of the Caribbean actually came out before this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but in the same year.
I feel like that could
Yeah.
So
that
weird.
could add up to something later.
And they have
Yeah,
very
maybe.
similar intros.
But it's become one of my favorite movies. Not to tip my hand too early in the podcast here, but yeah, kind of a roundabout way coming to this movie because, I was probably at the time geared up for Return of the King, obviously being the culmination of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which all of us were really into.
Yes.
So I didn't see this in theaters, but nevertheless found it. And yeah, so
Yeah.
here we are.
Yeah.
David.
All right, funny enough, I had almost no experience with this movie. I can't even remember hearing about it, actually. Didn't grow up with it in any way.
You're right. That is very funny.
So
Hilarious.
freaking funny. Anyway.
Okay, David, the joke's over.
That British dry humor.
Yeah, I know. I had not had any experience with this movie, and I don't want to show any more of my hand.
So basically what you're saying is you have not seen it, but you said it in like 5 sentences.
I know.
Is there one other way you can say that?
I took the Noah approach.
That's not
No,
true.
the Noah approach would be like, then I didn't see it like, and I like didn't watch
Let me try the Irina approach then.
long silence.
Noah's not speaking.
Yeah.
Okay. Irina, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay. For me, I didn't watch it in theaters either. I actually don't remember who I saw it with. I don't think I watched it of my own volition, but I remember enjoying it the first time I saw it. But it must have been either a year or two after it actually was released in theaters. So that's about my experience with it. And I saw it maybe a couple times since, but it's been a while since I had watched it last.
Yeah. So overall, kind of a slightly positive.
Yeah,
memory
it
of
had a pretty positive memory in my opinion.
Yeah. Noah.
All right, for me, it's roughly the same as Irina's, except I saw it one time when I was way little. And
Way little.
yes, way little. And I
2003.
didn't see it again. Past that, I completely forgot everything about it and watched it with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
So there you have it.
For me, it's a movie, I want to say I've seen it 2.5 times before this review.
Yeah.
The first time, I was bored by it because I wanted just exciting blockbuster entertainment.
Yeah.
And then I remember coming back to it because something about it still kind of stuck in my memory as, there's something interesting there. Maybe I should revisit this movie, and people seem to like it. So I watched it again, and I was like, and this was probably 5 years after seeing it, and I saw it close to after it came out on DVD. So 5 years after that, I watched it again, and I was kind of blown away by it and really enjoyed it. So yeah, that's basically my brief history
We
on
weren't
that.
ready for this movie,
Yeah,
honestly.
that's kind of what I wanted to say, almost just without getting too far ahead of ourselves. Kind of a lot of this movie boils down to it's ahead of its time in some ways. Because
Yeah.
like you said, people are wanting, just kind of easily accessible blockbuster action.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like this film took a different approach.
This movie could totally fit into nowadays. I
Oh,
feel
yeah.
like the way they film this fit perfectly with a lot of what movie goers are looking for.
What, like 1917 and The Revenant and
Exactly.
the more
Yeah.
the more
Yes,
serious-minded,
the
like
slow approach.
sophisticated blockbuster type
Oh, yeah.
movies.
Also, yet again, I love the usage of everything practical.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
Yeah.
absolutely
I
everything.
don't even know how they
practical.
did
They
half
do
of
it
these
perfectly.
things.
I can't even think of a single thing that was obviously just done by computer engineering.
Yeah, there's
And
a
I don't
few-
even think they.
There's a
really?
few little things I saw, but we'll get into it.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't notice it.
There's a couple of like
at all.
It's mostly like particle effects. So there's
yeah.
parts in this movie where they use smoke, and most of the smoke looks real. But there's one point towards the end of the movie where they utilize smoke, and it looks kind
I
of
think I know what you're
Are you
talking
sure?
computer generated. I could be wrong, but I feel
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it didn't billow like
Okay.
smoke is.
Yeah,
supposed
the
to.
same
But
way you would expect.
That is
Fair enough.
That is no big deal. It didn't look bad at all. It just looked like it slightly doesn't look
right,
whatever.
right.
Fair enough.
So, Master and Commander was directed by Peter Weir. He also directed The Truman Show and Dead Poets Society.
This is a very Australian production, by the
Two
way.
of those.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Why?
Starring Russell Crowe, Paul Bettany, Billy Boyd, and James Darcy. Screenplay by Peter Weir and John Coley, and adapted from the books by Patrick O'Brien. Are y'all ready to talk about the story?
Oh yeah.
Yes, sir.
Let's rip into it.
Let's do this. During the Napoleonic Wars, Captain Jack Aubrey of the HMS Surprise is ordered to fight the French privateer Acheron. Acheron ambushes Surprise, causing heavy damage while remaining undamaged by the British guns. The ship's boats tow Surprise into a fog bank to evade pursuit. Aubrey's officers tell him that Surprise is no match for the Acheron and they should abandon the chase. Aubrey points out that Acheron must not be allowed to plunder the British whaling fleet. He orders Surprise refitted at sea rather than returning to port for repairs. William Blankenly has his arm amputated due to injuries sustained in battle. Shortly afterwards, Acheron again ambushes Surprise, but Aubrey slips away in the night by using a decoy raft and ship's lamps.
I'm going to go ahead and ask Noah. Hey, Noah, how do you pronounce the French ship name?
Is it Acheron?
Yes.
Acheron.
Sorry.
Macron.
Macaron?
Macron.
Now,
Emmanuel Macron.
there's something to be said about your native language. So you might not be 100% wrong, but I would say the preferred pronunciation is Acheron.
Usually I get two options in my head of what to say, and I go
choose the
with the
wrong
wrong one.
So
Yes.
the way
Like
that
Gul'dan.
Captain Jack Aubrey in this
Gul'dan.
film says it is Acheron.
Well, with Gul'dan, he had about 1 in 36 options. So
Acheron sounds cooler anyway, so I will go with that.
Yeah.
Pronunciation aside,
So right off the bat, I love the attention to detail in this movie. I feel like it's very focused on showing the processes that the crew go through, and it seems very authentic, even though I
Yeah,
have no
yeah.
knowledge of, how that is actually done.
It was the detail they put into
well,
it.
it really does seem like they did their research for
Oh,
sure.
yeah.
so this is one of the episodes that I feel like the Wikipedia article is going to be a little bit of a disadvantage because it doesn't highlight that detail.
Yeah, but that's what you're here for.
Yeah.
So how did y'all feel about the introduction? You're below decks, you get the drums call to action, and then we meet Captain Jack Aubrey, and they have a ship sighting.
I think it had a very strong intro. I think the only thing I would not like about it was the kind of script beginner, because I think that was something that reminded me of Hunt for Red October or one of those old military films where they had kind of like, this is the SS so-and-so, their mission is to do this. Which it's like that was a style choice.
Kind of Star Wars.
I much more prefer it to those espionage movies though that have like an entire like couple of paragraphs that you have to read before
Star
you go
Wars.
into
And you're
it.
like, oh great, here we go.
Star Wars
Oh,
up.
yeah.
So I see where you're coming from. I do feel it helps to the average person seeing this just to give context.
Right.
I do.
Especially being, in the 19th century, the Napoleonic Wars. Most of us average people probably don't know the history of that
Yeah,
or aren't
yeah.
familiar with it
Oh,
enough
I
to.
do.
I think
No.
the funny thing is I agree with that, but having that little brief description in the beginning too, it's kind of funny because it's like, all right, we're going to give you some info, a couple lines, but that's it. The rest of this, you're on your own kind of thing.
So, yeah, I guess, and it's almost even condescending a little bit maybe, but it also probably helps bring you straight into the picture because unlike movies that we're used to nowadays, it's not like an origin story where you see full development from how people meet to each other. You're jumping straight into the action in the pursuit.
Yeah, it's a slice of their life.
Yeah,
Just
and also kind of hints you into maybe the people who read the novels, hey, this is a change from what happened in the novels.
Yeah.
Whereas Reese mentioned this too, that the pursuit vehicle or the target ship that they're chasing is changed in this film to a French vessel versus an American vessel. And that was a change intentionally to probably not tick off American audiences because it's an important
So in the original
region.
book, it was an American ship?
Yes. So this actually
dials it back 5 years.
Before we get fully into the plot, this movie pulls from not just its namesake of the title. So Master and Commander is the first of 20 and a half novels.
It's crazy.
So Master and Commander is the first novel, and then Far Side of the World is the 7th novel out of 20. And it actually cherry picks events from 7 or so novels here in the Aubrey Maturin series. Just to provide you all with some context, you listeners who aren't familiar with it. The Far Side of the World is the most heavily relied on source here, but for American audiences, they didn't want to say, hey, the bad guys are Americans, because that's an important audience for them.
I heard they combined the two because Far Side of the World was the most adventurous book where it had a voyage. It was like a voyage, and Master and Commander had a big bombastic ship battle at the end.
Yeah.
So they kind of melded them together.
And this almost goes back to what we talked about with Narnia, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where it's an episodic style of writing versus, 3-act structure with introduction, climax, resolution kind of thing, where, hey, this event happened in this kind of thing. Very descriptive writing.
Yeah.
And that kind of lends its nature to the nautical side of things. And that's for some people, and that's a whole different discussion about, the novel side of things versus film. And I'm probably digressing too much here.
Yeah, I feel
though.
Yeah.
Just, it's supposed to be episodic, as you said. But when you compare it to Caspian and where they kind of dropped the ball on just how they put it all together, this just really captures everything. I haven't read the books, but just watching it, you can already tell that it's really well put together.
When they were trying to make this movie, they were literally hanging off of every one of the author's words, trying to reconstruct the feeling of that time and like the look and sound of everything. And they were trying to emulate that, and you'll notice it in the sound design and just how everything's put together, that it's just, there's such an attention to detail.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool that like when you're watching this, it really makes you put the actual events of being on a ship into perspective, because when you watch something like Pirates of the Caribbean or Voyage of the Dawn Treader, you think, oh yeah, being on a ship is fun. It's just, cool, and there are games, and it's really simple and just a jolly ride.
Yeah, and I think Pirates of the Caribbean is a natural competitor or comparison, so to speak, to this film, just because of the theme, but also a completely different tone.
Oh, yeah.
Well, honestly, it's like how Iron Man and Dark Knight released in the same year. Where it was Iron Man's the fun version, and Dark Knight's the serious, more authentic kind of like, how would a superhero actually be in the real world?
It's almost like one is an aspect where it kind of fantasizes about that being on a ship and being a or a seaman or a pirate, versus what it would really be like, the truly gritty aspect of being there for months and months.
It really makes you not want to be there.
Oh, yeah.
It's really fascinating to watch, but especially when there are certain parts where people get hurt and there's only one doctor on board and there's lots of things happening.
Oh, yeah.
Or if you step out of line at all,
All right.
there are things that can go wrong.
So
Let's
quickly.
Go ahead.
So on that note that you're talking about fantasticalness, fantasy versus the historical kind of realism of this, these events Patrick O'Brian actually wrote are based on actual historical events. Captain Jack Aubrey is loosely based on Thomas Cochrane and other actual people who lived in history.
Lord Nelson's
And some of these
trousers.
events we'll get on later actually happened. And so these are kind of an amalgam of things that happened in history, and O'Brien's putting his twist on into a narrative. And even in his introduction to Master and Commander to the Forward, O'Brian writes that, the things that he's writing out in his own story are almost understatement to what happened in real life.
Wow.
Where you wouldn't believe it.
So it's not embellished. It's like
Right.
It's just
actually
kind of what happened.
Yeah, it was cooler in real life, and he's not even doing justice to what really
Yeah.
happened.
wow.
So, and I took us on a really long tangent here.
Yeah, that's
my
fine.
my original point was, I guess, that blurb at the beginning's kind of giving you context, bringing you into the story right in the midst of it. Time setting wise, these events, when they change it from chasing a USS vessel, where during the War of 1812, now we're back to
Right.
1803 or 1805.
1807, I think it was.
Yeah.
During the actual Napoleonic Wars. So that's a little
Right,
bit of
right.
a clue, probably why they gave you that text blurb.
Yeah.
Hey, say,
I think the only thing about it is that it kind of dates the film. That's
Yeah.
the only
Yeah.
negative. Like other than
I
that,
can
it
see
makes
that.
a lot of sense.
I think going back to this portion of the movie that we're discussing, I liked that it set the opening sequence is almost kind of a horror film.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like in the fog, they're kind of just someone kind of sighted the ship, but didn't know if they actually saw it. It's almost like
Yeah.
a ghost. And
Yeah, I was thinking they just did an amazing job of just setting that suspense and immediate danger. Like, oh man, that is something that
Yes.
these people looked out for.
Yeah. Right,
like
right.
that is
And they
that
also
is
show
scary.
you the main character, Jack. He really does show his character there when he acknowledges the fact that he can't see what the other person saw and no one else can corroborate it, but he told him that he did a good job and did the smart move by telling him regardless, and that kind of lets you in on what kind of person you're about to watch the rest of the movie.
And
Right,
it
right.
also establishes high stakes that the Acheron is a ship that you do not want to mess with.
Right, right.
And when you establish that they are the underdog right from the beginning, and that this is like a predator ship, they literally call it like a predator later on.
Oh, yeah.
It really makes the mission, you're more invested in it because of that. And it establishes that right from the first scene, which is very smart.
I'm really glad you all picked up on that, because
Yeah.
as people who didn't read the book or books, I'm glad that kind of shone through.
Oh yeah.
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 It's hard not to, the way they set it up, because the back and forth between the Acheron and Jack.
It's like a cat and mouse.
It's this mutual weird respect between him and the
Oh, yeah.
captain of this other ship, and it's almost like a Moby Dick meets like Count of Monte Cristo in a way. I don't know. It's like it's has a lot of energy the way they set it up, and they jump straight into. I think when I first saw that opening scene when they first attack, within the first 5 minutes, I think the first line out of my head was, "Where do you go from here?" Like, this is a major battle in the first 5 minutes of the
Yeah.
movie,
Yeah.
and their ship is
And it
almost
was
destroyed.
So good,
Well,
and the
where do
sound
you
design-
go?
Yeah.
so good.
It
Well,
really sets up
yeah.
their underdogness,
Yeah.
if that's a word, which is kind of a theme even from the beginning, that they're always, Captain Jack Aubrey's always fighting and clawing for command of what could be with something he's given circumstance. It's, it's an uphill battle
Right.
for him.
But,
Speaking of
real-
Captain... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, but real quick to mention or answer your question of where they go after that huge kind of what would seem to be a climactic battle. It really shows that you don't have to have all the bells and whistles, and you don't have to have all this fantastical, awesome stuff battle everywhere to make a really great story. You just make the character relations really interesting. You make the plot more filled out. You give out all
Character
this
development.
background
What's great-
character development, and it's just you feel really immersed in it.
What's great though is they do have all those bells and whistles. They just bring them out in an authentic way that feels natural.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
doesn't feel
there's-
forced at all.
Yeah, it has all of those staples that, blockbusters have,
Oh,
but
yeah.
it
Yeah.
implements them in a way that it just doesn't seem like it's popcorn
yeah.
entertainment.
Also,
It-
like the cool thing is they did a really good job displaying what ship battles would be like, but like enough that you're not bored, but also showing you that it's a little more labor intensive and prolonged than you would expect. Like this
Yes.
whole trying to organize shooting off the cannons and then trying to maneuver yourself in a way to actually hit the ship is a little longer of a process.
Yeah.
Than
Oh,
you
and
would
imagine
expect.
it. I hadn't really thought of this before, but imagine you're that person to make that first shot.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be accurate with that, and if you miss it, your boat's just
Every shot.
Yes,
counts.
and what
Yeah.
what this does, and they establish this later on, like I want to say towards the end, or they're actually training ahead of time
Oh,
to
yeah.
go against the Acheron the second time, but they're timing themselves. Like here,
Right,
this
right.
is how
Our
this
2
is how
to
long
1.
it takes, and you get in your mind the process of a ship battle better than
Right,
you
right.
would in something of like a Pirates of the Caribbean
Right,
movie,
right.
where it's like okay, they shot they shot, and now it's a waiting period.
Oh,
where
Jack-
you gotta just
All right.
Yeah.
How many people
Jack just
actually
slid over there somehow, and
How many people like movies have you seen where they do prep on shooting cannons on a ship to prepare for battle? You never see a prep for battle on a ship.
And I
And
almost
it
wanna
somehow be
interject
interesting.
probably
Yeah.
several times during this podcast. I'll have to try to restrain myself. Is that's in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a credit to O'Brien. That prep where Aubrey is, hey, let's train my guys with the assault portion, the attack portion, and they're timing everything. That's in the book. So that's a credit to O'Brien, the source material and stuff, and the director for pulling from that and being faithful to the source material, but also,
It also shows the captain in that scene where he's inspiring the men to do better when they're practicing, and he's like, "Do you want to be singing, French songs with your children? Do you want to be doing this in France?" And they're all just screaming, "No!" It's an underrated pump up scene,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah,
all
yeah.
just for like testing cannons.
Anyway-
I got riled up.
so yeah,
Let's talk a little bit about Captain Aubrey and
Ooh, yeah.
the doctor's relationship, which I
Yeah.
feel like is maybe one of the highlights of the movie.
oh
May
man,
I
so many
start?
highlights.
They have
though.
so much chemistry.
I low key think that this might be Russell Crowe's best role.
Yeah.
I know,
I-
like a lot of people like to say Gladiator, and
Mm-hmm.
I think he's amazing in that. But just watching this, there's so many little nuances in his
Yeah.
I'm very
acting
tempted to agree with
that
you there.
he's just so
In
good.
fact-
There's this interaction with I forget the
Convinced
the
even.
kid's name in this.
Well,
William.
He just has one thing that Russell Crowe
Oh,
does
my
is
goodness.
the captain is very focused on, where he has got I don't know, he sees something in the children on this boat.
yeah.
Where he wants to make them feel at ease but also inspire them.
And stay a leader and not kind of
Yeah.
come across as leaning towards
you
them.
kind of get the
Yeah.
sense that this is a pet project almost for Russell Crowe.
Yes.
right.
And even we'll talk about this later in the franchise aspect of things. But yeah, I completely see where you're coming from, and there's a lot of nuance in this that Russell Crowe really devotes himself to portraying accurately and to the best of his ability, and it's refreshing to see that.
I
And
think that. Oh, sorry.
oh no,
ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to say that I really love his relationship with the character Steven. I forget his last name. I know
Matron.
it, Matron.
Dr. Stephen.
And that they almost kind of resemble the husband and wife of this ship.
So-
That's true.
Yeah, and not to interrupt you.
Oh, no, you're fine.
But yeah, so that relationship has been compared to Sherlock Holmes and Watson.
Oh,
And
yes.
I think actually more accurately would be Kirk and Spock.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes.
But it's a very cool dynamic, and when you think of that kind of dynamic, you don't jump immediately to the story. You jump to one of those two that I
Oh, yeah.
mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And I think because there are so many characters, you would expect to get really lost. But I think they stand out individually really well.
Right.
To the point where you can remember their character. Even if you don't necessarily remember their names, you know who they are exactly. And I think going along with what you were saying about Russell Crowe in this, I actually was telling David while we were watching it, I thought, usually when I see Russell Crowe in something, I think Gladiator, but this was one of the few films where when I saw him, I was able to forget that he was Maximus for a little bit.
Yeah.
And because he does a good job playing this captain.
It's so good.
Even
Yeah.
Bettany's mannerisms, like you can tell that he is portraying Stephen Maturin, and Crowe and Bettany have a little bit of a rapport from A Beautiful Mind, where they work together as
that's
well.
right.
Another of my
I'd
favorite
forgotten
films. But yeah, so they have that going for them. But you're right. The relationship between Aubrey and Maturin is vital, and that's why it's called the Aubrey Maturin series. Not
And
Yeah.
the movie rests on that relationship
Oh, yeah.
being successful, which I think
They're the foundation of it. Like
Yeah.
I would say that there's so many things going on, but the fact is the whole setup of the movie is around their up and down in relationship, and
Yeah.
I can rely on that. to
I
carry me through
also,
it.
and we'll talk about this more, but and we should be moving on.
Yeah, sorry.
But
So
I
easy
think
to get
the
stuck.
give and take of their relationship is good because they learn from each other.
Oh, yeah.
And the result of them learning from each other helps both of them in the long run towards the end as the movie pays off in the end. So yeah, let's move on in the story and we'll discuss it. That was a long section.
Yeah,
little
that's my fault.
long-winded.
So feel free to rein me in because I have a
Oh, no, no.
lot.
The thing is, this is a movie that I like to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
it's
It's an
going
I
to
think
be
epic.
it's
Yeah.
definitely worth talking a little more in depth about.
Yeah. Following the privateer south, Surprise rounds Cape Horn and heads to the Galapagos Islands, where Aubrey is convinced that Acheron will prey on Britain's whaling fleet. During the pursuit, a mast carrying one of the ship's crew members falls, and Aubrey is forced to cut it loose to save the ship. The ship's doctor, Maturin, is interested in the island's unique flora and fauna, and Aubrey promises his friend several days' exploration time. When Surprise reaches the Galapagos, however, they recover the survivors of a whaling ship destroyed by Acheron. Aubrey hastily pursues the privateer, dashing Maturin's expectation of more time to explore. What I did read that this was the first movie to be filmed, or to film in the Galapagos Islands.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Well, I mean,
those
I felt
scene-
like that had to be true when you saw the iguanas and
Yeah,
the
actually,
tortoises and
interesting about the iguanas. The iguanas were not filmed on the Galapagos Islands.
Oh, okay.
That was in Baja, California, and they actually painted the iguanas.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my god!
Oh my
So-
gosh! I
Yeah,
feel
it's-
like they would have problems with that
lied
these
to me.
days.
But there were. It's so funny because they were actually at the Galapagos
Oh, that's
Islands.
I
hilarious.
just couldn't find those iguanas.
Yep.
Yeah, probably.
Did they throw the iguanas into the water and pretend they would swim?
okay,
They do
swim.
No, it is cool to see that kind of ahead of its time where, hey, this character, Maturin, is ahead of Charles Darwin.
Yeah.
You know, the Voyage of the Beagle in 1832, where this takes place in 1805 in the film. I
Right.
think it's like 1813 is the last chronology of the books itself.
Yeah.
So it's before Darwin writes The Origin of Species.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the Galapagos Island
Right.
kind of fresh, and that's where he even talks about, hey, you're making history.
Right. Right.
So that was a really cool
you might
aspect.
be
in
the
the movie.
first naturalist. Yeah.
I also thought that scene where they cut the mast from the ship is the first emotional moment where you're like,
gosh.
I don't even know the
man.
sailor that they cut, but I still
Yes.
Well,
Rewatching
feel
it,
for
Wasn't
them.
he also a Will? I think.
he was a petty officer.
Yeah.
He wasn't the
lieutenant.
lieutenant or
Yeah, I
lieutenant.
think he was a
Yeah.
lieutenant.
Yeah.
He was, yeah,
We say lieutenant.
Sorry,
So-
yeah, lieutenant, lieutenant.
yeah.
movie.
It's the
I
same
like
thing.
lieutenant better.
British,
Same.
But I
kind
do
of
say
archaic
lieutenant in
British is
general.
lieutenant, but they're the same. Lieutenant
Yeah,
and lieutenant
yeah.
are the same.
It is.
But yeah, rewatching this film, that was an immensely emotional part. And you're seeing Crowe himself, the master and commander of the ship, taking an axe himself
Yeah.
to make that decision, that vital decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Took the utilitarian approach.
Right.
It's
The-
also
was.
one of the first times that the score actually, like, not just
Oh,
the
God.
soloing of the violin and the cello, but the actual score of the movie kicks in.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh,
I had
it's so
told
beautiful, but
both
sad.
David and Noah that was a song that I had added to my playlist. Like, I specifically have a playlist of my favorite film score pieces,
I have
and
that
that was
too.
on there. And it's just I'm a sucker for those melancholy.
But it was still kind of
So-
it's melancholy but uplifting in a
Well,
weird way.
okay,
it was
but
so weird.
well, the thing
The
is,
actual
like,
scene
yeah.
or the music?
when
What's
the music when
interesting-
that is happening.
yeah.
What's interesting about this is that just recently I've been on kind of a orchestrated music trend,
Classical.
kind of classical style music,
Click.
and I like to read all of the the classic books and such. But I'll get in the zone. I'll put on some music and just start reading whatever it is I'm reading at the time. But while I was looking at old orchestrated music, I came across some of Master and Commander, and I actually as well have put that on my list,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's
Stood out
without
to you.
knowing any of the emotionality of it, because I had completely
Yeah.
forgotten the story.
It's
but
a beautiful score.
yeah,
It
I
almost
actually
reminds me
have
of
that
Zorro.
on my
Well, that-
playlist
Yeah,
as
that's a
well.
credit to Davies,
Yes.
which, like I said in the intro, is he was what drew me to this movie. I think Yo-Yo Ma did the performance
Oh,
of
yeah.
the
I knew it.
cello.
I
And
knew
interesting, on a side note,
Yeah.
no pun intended, both Crowe
Yo-Yo
and
Ma.
Bettany learned violin and cello respectively for their parts in this movie.
Interesting.
So they were
That's great.
playing.
They weren't
it.
playing in the exact scene, David. No.
All right. Anyway, I don't want to get into that.
All
one.
right.
But real quick about the about just the acting of again Russell Crowe. He has this way of just micro expressing himself and his countenance in
Oh,
all
yeah.
of this entire movie. It is as if he actually is this
Yeah.
character.
That
To jump-
scene was just
And,
heartbreaking.
To jump off
It
of
was
that, it's
just crazy.
His ability to convey so much without even speaking.
Exactly.
So in that scene where that guy is lost out at sea, the mast falls down and he's in the ocean and they're trying to save him, and they have to make a decision: do we save this man and risk sinking this entire ship, or cutting him loose and letting him drown and saving everybody else? But there's a point where Captain Jack is looking at, I don't even know what his role is, but the bigger guy who's on the ship is obviously a higher command. They have this
Wait, higher command?
He's,
than
the
Jack?
he's the first lieutenant.
Oh,
Pollard's
okay.
the first
Got it,
lieutenant.
got it.
They have this eye contact, and there's not a word spoken, and they
And
both
you can tell.
you can see this micro expression between the two of them, and the guy leaves because he could just read the mind of Russell Crowe's character.
If that were me, I would just be like, I don't know what you want.
he's always like, yeah, we have to cut him loose, and then he goes and grabs the machete, the knife, or
Not
the
machete.
hatchet. It was
Yeah,
more of a
there you
hatchet.
go.
Yeah, and then they cut him loose, and it was so
Gosh,
so
hard.
heartbreaking.
Imagine
They-
how hard that is.
They did a number of things on this movie, and some of them were Russell Crowe's idea in preparation for the role. But Russell Crowe would have all the people playing the various crew members wear different colored shirts associated with their rank on the crew when they're on
Okay.
set, so that he could try to assume a captain authoritative role.
Man,
Interesting.
that's interesting. It really shows too.
Apparently, they also had their own little room that was excluded from the rest of the set and everyone else. And the crew members they developed a natural rapport.
Interesting.
And yeah, they had their own like rugby team too, so they could build up like a camaraderie.
Did this show,
That's so cool.
or
Yeah.
sorry, did this movie get any awards of any
It
kind?
actually did. I don't remember which one.
Cinematography is one, and director.
Yeah,
Okay.
Director.
Oscar.
Yeah.
And then
Oscar.
Return,
So it got
Return of the
Oscar-
King
or
took,
what,
took
Oscars,
everything
wow.
else.
Oscar.
Return
It got
of the King.
Oscar.
Yeah.
Naturally.
Wow, I did it again. Oscars in both, huh? There we go.
The one,
got it out.
the one year I don't mind.
crazy.
I
It
wouldn't mind
deserves
this
it.
movie losing when Lord of the Rings is.
Yeah,
also,
it's
That's rough.
it's
What
fair.
do you, like, it's
That is
rough when you
really
have a
rough.
It is
movie
rough,
like this come
yeah.
out the same year as Lord of the
But
Rings.
my goodness, what a year when you think about
Yeah.
it.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, the HMS Surprise is becalmed for several days. The crew becomes restless and disorderly. Midshipman Hallam, already unpopular with the crew, is named a Jonah by the sailors, otherwise someone who brings bad luck to a ship. As the tension rises, crew member Nagel, or Nagy, I don't know what it is, refuses to salute Hallam on the deck and is flogged for insubordination. That night, Hallam commits suicide by jumping overboard with a cannonball. The next morning, Aubrey holds a service for Hallam. The wind picks up again, and Surprise resumes the chase. This
right.
was interesting.
So
Yes.
this was
becalmed, meaning that they're almost in a drought. There's no wind.
Yeah.
And they have low rations, so spirits are very low.
this
Yeah.
is the closest to a supernatural influence that this
Yeah.
movie
Oh,
has.
yeah.
Where it's like Hollum kills himself and suddenly the wind comes
And
back.
Hollum was one of the people with the hatchets that cut the mast.
Yeah.
So that could have that
right.
bad deed could have given them some sort of bad luck.
Well,
Yeah.
either that or that's why the crew in general were already questioning Aubrey.
Yeah.
And we see Aubrey talking with Maturin saying he actually is a captain that cares about what the crew thinks of him.
Yeah.
But,
A little too much.
well, that's something that not all masters and commanders would,
Yeah.
if they think of people as their subordinates,
Yeah.
that's something that this film didn't really explore origin-wise because Aubrey was passed up a lot and came from, the ranks.
Yeah.
Not to digress too much.
Sorry,
But-
I also want to correct. I thought you were talking about Hollum.
No, Hollum also. So there were 3 people that took the hatchets to the ropes.
I know it was Hollum and the first lieutenant, right?
Right.
Left
And
Yeah.
Aubrey that actually cut and, effectively have that person's blood on their hands to save the ship as a whole.
Yeah.
And so Hollum also bears that blame. So kind of leads to his suicide.
Yeah.
Right.
So you have an emotional moment directly connected to another emotional moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As he's labeled the Jonah, and he fully,
So
feels that himself.
The thing is about his character, though, I think all of the other insubordinates saw a weak spot in his armor. And so they found a scapegoat for their blame. Whereas you can't really blame the captain unless you have a full-on mutiny in your hands.
And no one wants to blame him.
But because Hollum just seemed like a weaker character, he was easy to pick on for them.
All right. So this scene is this segment of the movie is, while I actually think it's very well done, I think it's the only part of the movie that comes off as like, if it were like a TV season, this would be the filler episode.
Oh, yeah.
Where I don't know how much it services the overall plot of the movie.
Wow.
It's just and this is why I'm pitching it, because I want
completely
push.
disagree with you. I feel like
I'm
this
glad.
is a
All right, well,
fulcrum for
we'll
this
finish-
movie.
Okay, cool.
Reese's
That's
reasoning
good.
then.
I was wanting pushback
I'm
from
with you
this
on that
because
one
I
too
was
as well.
good. That's good. I just think that overall, it's this thing that happens that they deal with, and it's sad, and then they move on to going after the Acheron again.
So shallow. Reese.
So my response to that is, just a little prelude. My main complaint for this movie is kind of the lack of depth of character development, and this is one of the machines that add to Aubrey's character development, or the mechanisms that allow him to express his humanity, even though he's the master and commander of this ship, post-captain. It kind of gives him depth of character because he feels remorse for, one, losing someone that he was responsible for.
Yeah.
And then also that directly, suicide is a big thing. And him, having the service for him as well, he shows that he wants to respect him instead of just casting him off as a casualty of war.
Yeah. I do feel like you still got that sense of remorse from him from the cutting the mast scene, though. Where
Right.
he has such a hesitation in just like, oh, this is, I do not want to do this, but I have
Yeah.
to. And that, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine. I was
stepping in.
at the end of my point anyway.
Yeah. So when it came to that, it wasn't just for me at least, it wasn't just the building of Jack's character. It was the crew as a whole, because up until that point, you don't see as much in movies this sort of whole of seamen and crew.
What was
And-
that?
Dang it!
A hole of semen?
So
Huh?
I was trying to think of the word. I couldn't think of it.
No, you're right.
You're right.
And
no, that is
a lot of
that is the
Aubrey's
word.
superstition.
A
and
lot of
everything.
Aubrey's tension in the books is he came from within the ranks, so a lot of his tension is, it used to be us versus them, and now he is them
Yeah.
compared to the crew. And so this kind of portrays that without really, if you haven't read the books, you probably might not get that.
Yeah.
But he is them, and he's kind of responsible for that without being able to directly relate to the average,
Yeah.
sailor.
I feel like, though, he had a meaningful exchange with Hollum, though, before his death, where he's
yeah,
like,
he did.
Right.
he's trying to encourage
He
him,
is.
and he's like, hey, you want them to respect you? do this.
Right.
You know,
And
Have
I
a
feel like-
backbone and stand up.
Yeah, and Aubrey
Yeah.
almost sees a younger self in Hallam, because Hallam is a petty officer, but he hasn't really struck on that path to
Yeah.
rise up.
Yeah.
So he sees himself early on in Hallam being in limbo emotionally.
Yeah.
And this unfortunately takes the wrong turn.
Yeah. Well, Hallam also it seems like a sensitive soul and probably not made for this
He wasn't
line of
cut out
work.
for it.
So it's just I can see there's sympathy there trying
Yeah.
to like hold up for him and say like you got to do this if you're going to survive out here. You got to make sure you earn their respect by
Yeah.
being
Right.
strong.
And I will say this movie is so masterful in building up this moment around this character that you barely know,
yeah.
and you feel emotional about them leaving, even though you've only known them for
Yeah,
such a
no.
small amount of time.
I didn't even think I liked Holland for most of it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, when they started picking on him after that, because he's just doing
Yeah,
his job.
yeah.
Like, he hasn't done anything necessarily
Well,
bad at this
they
point.
build up the myth of Jonah.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
And that draws you also into the nautical, like the jargon almost, you know.
Yeah.
That was what I was gonna bring up
immersed,
about it.
You're immersed in their culture.
Yeah, yeah.
So
That's
Yeah.
the thing with
The-
building that whole
Yeah.
the sort of connection with the crew is
Yeah.
that they keep connecting to Jonah, and then that was the scene that really brought you into this is what it's like at sea. It's almost this what's it called? Superstitious
Yeah.
connection.
Well, it's like
Yeah.
once you whisper one little thing, then it catches on to everyone.
Yeah.
And because
yeah.
they're in such an isolated group.
It's like a cabin
Kinda-
fever
Yeah.
situation.
It's a
Kind of
cabin
like witch
fever.
trials
yeah,
a little
so
bit.
like once
Oh,
that
100%.
once the rumors
Yeah.
spread, they create their own reality.
yeah.
So they only see the mysticism, and it's weird that it's kind of interesting that in a sailor's lore, there's this blend of both religion and mysticism at the same time.
Yeah.
It's kind of fascinating.
and Matron
really.
being the scientist, he's like, "You don't believe this, do you?" And Aubrey
Right.
himself is like, "It is what it is." Kinda
yeah.
hinting
Well, he's
that, yes,
kind
he
of
does believe it.
non-committal about
Yeah.
it.
So I'm going to pose a question for you all. So Hallam takes a cannonball, takes one for the team, jumps off the boat.
I wouldn't say he took it for the team.
Well,
Okay.
no, that was his.
In his
Well, in,
eyes,
the,
that
in
was-
their
that
eyes.
Yeah, yeah.
In their
reaction.
eyes.
So he took one for quote unquote the team.
Yeah.
Do you think that was a smart move, or do you think that do you fall into the superstition camp or not?
I don't think it's supernatural, but it's just I think it's meant to be one of those weird coincidences
Yeah.
where it would prolong sailors' beliefs in something being supernatural.
Right.
You know, where like that's maybe where those beliefs are born, where someone does a
It's-
drastic move like that and the tides change.
Yeah.
Or-
Right.
Whether or not it actually is important, it's actually a very smart vehicle for narrative transportation, basically bringing the audience into the story.
Right.
Where you're, do I believe in the Jonah or the curse, that kind
Yeah.
of thing. And then, hey, this guy is taking this heavily upon his soul, upon his shoulders. He takes a cannonball and drowns himself.
Right.
And then the winds come back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, it creates that conflict emotionally within the audience.
So there's also the thing that set up the whole scene better too was the fact that even before that, he said, "Oh yeah, Captain Jack said the winds should come back tomorrow." It puts that was almost more of a line for the audience because you're like, okay, well, he said the winds were going to come back, so
Yeah.
why would you kill yourself before that?
And there's the
There's the
thing
doubt.
where
Yeah.
there's a lot you can really unpack in this movie that kind of goes unseen by the casual eye.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of nuance here that, a lot of people can kind of make that argument of anything. But I kind of honestly feel there's a lot of nuance that they did really well that you kind of have to almost see this multiple times to appreciate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Or read the original books.
I want to
Yeah.
read this book now.
All right. Go ahead.
Books.
Books.
There's 21
All
of them.
21 of them, yeah. Or 20 and a half or something. Whatever
All
it
right.
was.
Royal Marine Officer Captain Howard attempts to shoot an albatross, but accidentally hits Matron instead.
Stupid.
That's the doctor.
The surgeon's mate informs Aubrey that the bullet and a piece of cloth it took with it must be removed soon, otherwise they will fester. He also recommends the delicate operation be performed on land. Despite closing on Acheron, Aubrey takes the doctor back to the Galapagos. Matron performs surgery on himself using a mirror. Finally, giving up the pursuit of the privateer, Aubrey grants Maturin the chance to explore the Galapagos Islands and gather specimens before they head for home. While looking for a species of flightless cormorant, the Doctor discovers Acheron on the other side of the island. Maturin abandons most of his specimens and hurries to warn Aubrey.
Yeah.
I think-
So,
Sorry, go ahead, Noah.
oh, okay. So I thought it was interesting how before in the movie he had so much contention with going to land, and understandably, like going to explore, which is what the Doctor had wanted since they were out there.
Going against fighting the Acheron.
Right.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's just so ironic that in going back for his friend or subordinate, both, I suppose you
They
could
were.
say,
Yeah.
he ends up seeing them in sight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just they're right
Just a
there.
happy
And-
coincidence.
And it's just kind of like
Yeah.
a providence that
Yeah.
he went back and
It's supposed to
did that.
highlight the contrast of the conflict between Aubrey and Maturin.
Yes.
Because Aubrey is prioritizing his duty overall,
Right.
whereas Maturin obviously sees the more humanitarian
Yeah.
aspect.
Yeah.
of
And
things.
it shows their total friendship.
Yeah.
Or at least their admiration for one another,
You're right.
where Aubrey is willing to give Maturin, the Galapagos Islands and that discovery of new species that he knows that he desires. And Maturin is, when he discovers the ship, he's like, okay, this is the most important thing to Aubrey. I will
Yeah.
give him this. It's like in one sequence. It's
Yeah.
both of them completely fulfilling their friendship duties.
What
So-
an
Yes.
amazing character
They
development.
are
Agreed.
again like re-emphasizing how much they carry this movie. Like there are so many good aspects, but the two of them are a very important focus on this film's success. But to me, I constantly have that husband and wife analogy in my head. Because there's one that's obviously the more masculine approach, and another is a more feminine approach.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, a lot of people would look down on the Doctor as not really understanding fully the machinations of being on a ship
And in
the
war.
way it works and war and the importance of it. But in that scene where he's operating on himself, almost reminding Jack Aubrey, because Jack Aubrey is a little like squeamish about this whole scenario, that there are different kinds of strength and different kinds of masculinity.
And Jack Aubrey, the whole reason to their success in this ultimate story is learning from the Doctor that
Right.
you can
Yeah.
camouflage
Yeah.
based off his research on the
Yeah.
animals.
Iguanas.
Yeah, iguanas.
Well,
so
and the
cool.
fact
It's
that
not-
they
it's
even
not-
going to the
yeah.
island,
So-
it worked out in his favor.
Right.
Yeah, and a little bit of context here. So the books kind of highlight this a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
The doctors or surgeons, as they call them, on these ships usually are novices.
Yeah.
They are people who have a little bit more medical knowledge than the average person, but they're not doctors.
Right.
And that's what makes Maturin special,
Yeah.
is that he is actually a physician.
Yeah.
And,
And
he
a
is
naturalist.
actually, he elevates the entire crew and ship as a whole because he is a physician and
Mm-hmm.
educated, and he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's an esteemed doctor above just a medic.
Well,
Right.
they even
Heal
talk
people.
about that when he's working on the shipmate who had his head
Right.
hit a little bit when
Oh, yeah.
everyone's
Yeah.
watching.
Everyone's
and so
fascinated.
that's
Oh, they're
actually
looking at the
a
brain or
iconic
whatever.
scene of the first book where he does brain surgery on the
Right.
ship,
Yeah.
and he heals the skull with a pounded out flat silver
Yeah.
coin.
It was brilliant.
It's that's one of the iconic scenes of Master and Commander, the first book in the series. And going back to kind of highlighting Maturin's character himself, they don't honestly, in my opinion, do him justice in this
Yeah.
film because he is almost more of a pitiful character than Aubrey himself, in my opinion, and a lot of people who are fans of the original novels. They obviously took the approach of highlighting Aubrey's character, probably for kind of plot reasons.
They
But
did a pretty good job though of building
did.
his character though.
and I lost my train of thought here. So
Yeah, well, they just have such a good dynamic between the two of them. love them. Whether it falls short, or his character in particular falls short from the books, even on screen, they you can tell have a really strong bond. And what a normal doctor, getting out of line and arguing with him, like they would have been
Right.
strongly reprimanded. He
Yeah,
just
that would have been
yells
an
at him and-
insubordination for any
Yeah.
other circumstance.
Oh, yeah.
But Matron himself is a special case.
Yeah.
That's the husband and wife situation.
Right, for sure. So that, like you said, that does carry the movie. So,
I also loved the self-surgery scene.
Oh yeah.
that's what I was going to say next is almost like the audience as a whole nowadays in 2020 here, we've seen that kind of scenario several times now, like Lost did it, and I don't know who else, where someone has to perform surgery on themselves.
Yeah.
Like at the time, it's like you lose appreciation for that now, but at the time that was like, hey, this guy is like, that's a big thing. This guy is enduring pain.
My favorite moment was when Matron sees that Aubrey is unsettled.
Yeah.
And he asks Aubrey, "Are you okay?"
Right.
Like when he's the one that's doing surgery
Yeah.
on
Yes,
himself.
yes,
Open
yes.
wound on his chest.
I thought that moment was so
Well, it's
good.
almost
fine.
Like I said, it's almost kind of putting him in place, realizing like this is a tougher guy than I, gave him credit for. He has
He's
like
offering
more of
open
a
surgery on
He
himself.
earns more respect for his line of work, I think.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Surprise readies for battle once more. Due to Acheron's stronger hold, Surprise must be at close quarters to damage her. After observing the camouflage ability of one of Matron's specimens, Aubrey disguises Surprise as a whaling ship. He hopes the French will be lured in to capture the valuable ship rather than destroy it. Acheron falls for the disguise and Surprise launches her attack. With the back wheels of the cannons taken off, the cannons are able to fire upon Acheron's mainmast, while Captain Howard's marine sharpshooters pick off the crew of Acheron from above. Acheron is disabled when the mainmast snaps and falls into the sea. Aubrey leads boarding parties, engaging in fierce hand-to-hand combat. Upon capturing this ship, Aubrey is informed by the ship's doctor that the French captain is dead and is given the captain's sword.
Okay. That was one of my favorite moments in the entire movie.
Yeah.
Whenever not the whole battle, but at the end, whenever the other the supposed doctor gives him the captain's sword, it was this you win kind of situation.
Yeah.
I'm gonna honor you, even though we're at complete adversaries.
Even
Yeah.
though we
With
my
later,
sword.
even though we later discover that the doctor is the
Well,
captain.
Exactly.
A lot of
Yes.
this is supposed to highlight the tactical genius of Captain Aubrey, and he is taking part in devising the plan to take the Acheron.
Yeah.
Obviously, the bigger and stronger vessel is an underdog story, so he's capturing something that is way out of his league. Even his petty officers are telling him we should go home. But Aubrey is determined this is our mission, even though I fulfilled my mission a while ago. Like, this is what we need to do. The Acheron is preying on British whalers in the Galapagos Island. We need to do this.
Yeah.
And we can do this.
My one qualm was, did the French ship not notice that they had cannons?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's all I had to say. Like, I guess they have the covers for the cannons.
It's because this is based on an event of not only the books, but the original O'Brien basing his story on history. In the Age of Sail, this was commonplace where you disguise yourself. You don't raise your own flag until the very last second, declaring this is what side I'm on.
Yeah.
So that whole chameleon aspect was done in history. I don't think it was Cochrane. It was another famous, I don't know if it was Francis Drake, someone else.
Yeah.
That at the very last second, they are pretending to be an innocent civilian, like whaling ship. And then at the last second, within the range, raise your flag, raise your colors, and then broadside them when you have them unawares.
I feel like whaling ships would probably need larger ships. Who knows when it came to needing to purchase larger ships, like older, ships that were larger that may have had cannon fittings.
So without getting too technical, the HMS Speedy, which the Sophie and this the Surprise were based on a little bit, was a 14-gun ship, whereas the Acheron, I believe, was like a 74-gun ship. So it was much larger.
74?
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, you can get very technical into like brigs and sloops and that kind of thing. But it was definitely an underdog thing. That's why his genius was so pronounced in also the scene where they escaped the first time or the second time from the Acheron into the mist, where he had the decoy of the lanterns.
Yeah, which we didn't really talk about.
Yeah, so because that's kind of the Wikipedia thing, didn't really mention it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it did, but we just
that
didn't
was
touch
actually
on it.
something done by Thomas Cochrane in the HMS Speedy, where O'Brien took that and adapted to his novel. But he basically created a decoy ship out of lanterns so that the fire was drawn upon that versus the real ship. All of this is to say that this is developing Jack Aubrey as kind of a nautical or tactical genius.
Yeah, but one that is only successful because of his association with Maturin as well.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You know, like without their pairing, he wouldn't be, I feel like, the great captain that he is.
It does highlight.
He is Lucky Jack.
He almost has an Icarus complex where he kind of almost
Absolutely.
shoots too far.
The
you
thing
know?
is about him, though, is he reins it back.
Yeah.
Like in other films with less subtlety, they'd have the captain going all the way. But he almost realizes that, okay, this is impossible, so I'm just going to let the doctor, explore on the Galapagos Islands for a week.
Well, also the doctor mentions to him he's not familiar with losing. So that's sort of like his issue, is that he always wins out in the end. So he doesn't really consider the risk as often as he should.
But that dynamic also paints the importance of how Jack grows and says at the end, where before he was prioritizing duty, at the end he is about to be in prime position to confront the Acheron. He's like, no, my dear friend who is important to me is hurt. We're going back to land so that he can perform surgery or whatever.
It warmed my heart. I always that moment, that as far as all of us go, I feel like for me, that one touched me almost more than anything because
It was great.
he didn't allude to it in any way. He was hit and you're like, oh man, that sucks. What's going to happen now? And then there's that slight moment where one of the crew members or the second doctor who barely knew anything was like, well, if I had some sort of dry land to work on. And so that kind of prompted him to go back to the Galapagos. And the second he went there, he's like, oh, we're staying there for a week. I was like, oh, Jack,
that also highlights
Out.
that also highlights the level of respect or esteem that Maturin had himself, because his second, his replacement, the doctor that would have operated on him, that was the average of what a normal ship surgeon would be skill wise.
Yeah.
So
it was incredible.
Acheron and Surprise are repaired. While Surprise remains in the Galapagos, the captured Acheron is to be taken to Valparaiso. As Acheron sails away, Maturin mentions that their doctor had died months ago. Realizing the French captain deceived him by pretending to be the ship's doctor, Aubrey gives the order to change course to intercept Acheron and escort her to Valparaiso. Maturin is once again denied the chance to explore the Galapagos, but Aubrey wryly notes that since the bird he seeks is flightless, it's not going anywhere. And the two play Musica Notturna del Strade de Madrid by Luigi
Baccarini. So
that turns in pursuit to Acheron once more. Okay.
So that little witticism is, and also y'all's intro bit with the weevil, the puns.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a staple for Jack Aubrey using puns and kind of on the nose humor, whereas Maturin's a little bit more subtle, dry wit, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that was really cool to see.
Speaking on,
sorry.
do you mind if I?
Yeah,
real quick?
sure.
Yeah, just speaking on that last point. That's one of the nicest little twists there, where you realize the French captain is actually alive, and he literally
Yeah.
handed him his sword.
Yeah.
In like this,
I think that
this long-winded battle of between like kind of wits and just I guess expertise with their captain.
Sort of
and
like acceptance that
such,
he lost,
and
but
just
at the
being
same time
having
getting
a
out of there.
having a
So
seaworthy adversary.
The thing that I liked about that was I had been watching this or rewatching this again with David, and I hadn't seen it in years, but some of the events that were coming up started to trigger memories in my head, and I was able to anticipate what a lot of the plot turns were before they happened, except for this one. I had completely forgotten.
Yeah.
And I think that their twist at the end is very well hidden. And because once that happened and Paul Bettany or, the doctor says, no, their doctor had died or something.
Had died three weeks
Everybody
ago.
in the audience, like,
I was like, oh man, I totally forgot. That's
This movie
so good.
literally has everything.
I know.
It's
Also,
amazing.
Yeah.
it kind of hints as a sense of scale that's almost lost on an audience from 2020 that we're talking about now. The subtitle of this movie is "The Far Side of the World."
Yeah.
They are on the west side of the South American continent.
Yeah.
The Galapagos Island, Valparaiso, Chile, coming from based out of England or Great Britain.
Would that be considered the doldrums, or is that it's supposed to be around the equator, right?
it was right at the equator northwest of
yeah,
South
so
America.
that's like the doldrums, isn't it?
Aren't the doldrums just areas without wind?
Yeah,
Yes.
but it's usually near the equator. Like I
okay.
remember reading
Yeah.
this where they said it's like a mix of like stagnation as well as like intense storms.
Well, if
so
that's
it's like,
if that's the case, that really fits along with the fact that at one point there was no wind, they weren't
Yeah.
moving
Yeah.
for a while, and then you
Yeah.
see like, the scene, I guess prior to that, or
Yeah.
not the scene prior, but earlier, there's just this heavy storming.
Right,
So if that
right.
is the
Yeah.
case, that's really interesting.
And at
as
this
well.
point in history, this is towards the end of the Age of Sail, towards the transition of steam power, where they're reliant on trade winds.
okay.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
We that completes our story wrap up of our story of Master and Commander of the Far Side of the World. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be giving our brief reviews of the film and talking about the franchise, or in this case, the wannabe franchise that never was. Mm-hmm. See you then. All right, welcome back. We're going to get into our reviews for Master and Commander, and then we're going to talk about this franchise.
Could you sound
or
more
wannabe
depressed
franchise.
about it?
I'm a little
Gosh,
sad,
we haven't even talked about the technical aspects of the production of this movie.
We did a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah, we'll talk more. So, brief reviews. What did y'all think of this movie, David?
All right, so going to this, we were kind of talking about making this brief, but this is going to be really hard to make brief because
Don't do it.
this movie,
Speak your mind. This movie
I-
deserves your full thought.
it really does, honestly. So when I first heard we were watching this movie, Master and Commander, I didn't even know what to think. I had no image, no poster, no movie, nothing. I had no idea. I've never really heard of this movie except for maybe one time when I looked up Russell Crowe movies at one point.
It was really overshadowed by
I don't know
Return of the
how.
King.
I really don't know how I overlooked this movie somehow.
It's called Lord of the Rings and Pirates of the
Well,
Caribbean.
we're
I
also
guess, but I've
so
heard of
used
so many
to
other
like
movies.
popcorn flicks where
Oh yeah.
this kind of doesn't fit into that. It's
It
a little
really
bit
doesn't.
more-
It's
And
kind of a
subtle.
slow build.
It is.
but it's just. Sorry, I'll
No,
I'll
you're
say
fine.
stuff whenever it's my turn to
It's
say
fine.
stuff. Go ahead.
It's just this movie. It blew me away. I can easily say
Like a cannonball.
like a cannon freaking ball. It destroyed me. It made me so happy, and it hit all the things I'm looking for in a movie. I don't know how to describe it. It touched me in all the right places. That also sounded
In all
weird.
the wrong places.
That's not what I meant. I really like the movie, guys. I'm sorry. It's
Okay, it touched you. Go from here.
all right. I'm just gonna go ahead and say that this movie for me is a 9, easy. Like it's
9.
Definitely a 9.
Yeah.
It is the pinnacle of what we've gone over so far. There are no slip ups. It is everything I'm looking for in a movie. Practical effects, just perfection. The whole thing. Perfection.
So
All right.
9 out of 10, perfection.
Well, because it's not my favorite movie ever. That you can't hit a 10 if it's not my favorite movie ever.
That'd be
Now-
a perfect 5 out of 7.
Yes. Now this isn't. I'm not trying to challenge you here, but if you had to pick one negative thing to say about this movie, what is the thing that drops it from a 10 to a 9?
It is a hard. I think it's just the fact that I, unlike Andrew, am not as like I don't like naval things as much as maybe he does, but I guess it also made me realize I do like it more than I thought I did because they did
Yeah.
such a great job.
So maybe it's just like kind
It's
of
the content.
Yeah. Okay.
But overall, I think that there was not a single thing that they missed out on. There's certain slow moments, but that usually, especially in this, was used for either character development or story, building. It's just perfect the way they did it. I don't think they could do it any better than what they did. I don't even know if there's CGI mess ups. I would say that was the biggest thing in Hellboy 2, which I think was before this my highest rated movie. That one I could count actual problems I saw in the movie. This one I couldn't really pick one out.
Yeah.
It was maybe they could build more development in the French side. I would say like if they sort of built some more on the captain side. Of that.
I think it was. I agree with you, but at that last scene where they actually make the French more smart. I don't know. I can't talk right now.
No, you're fine.
But when they show that the French have an ingenuity of their own at the end, there is a nice little bit of character development that
It is.
is
Well,
like-
here's why I disagree with you on that, David. Because this is, I'm sorry, just on that one point. Just for the sake of the story, this is from their perspective as a crew and captain and doctor, and to suddenly switch over to another ship and their stuff, it kind of would really change the narrative.
Fair, yeah. I think I guess I am. You're 100% right. It would kind of ruin that sort of continuity they built up. I guess I'm just used to when you're seeing multiple perspectives like that,
Yeah,
and this movie doesn't do that as much in the right way. I couldn't say, what else was wrong with this movie other than that. I was just trying to find something, but as far as everything else goes, this is just the type of movie. All right, let's put it this way: when I went into this movie, I didn't have any opinion, right? This is now on my top 10 easy. Could potentially be top 5, I think.
wow.
Like
That's
this is
insane.
This went
That's
from
awesome.
I did not know this movie to making one of my top favorite movies. And it's easy for me to make that call. I can easily say this is top 10, potentially top 5. That's why this is a 9 for me.
Wow. Impressive. Irina.
All right. So, as far as watching this movie, I'd already known that I had liked it from before. I thought it was a great film. And watching it again, that was just reaffirmed, but even more so. For me, I think like you can't help but try to compare something you've watched to things that you've seen before. And the two things I thought of watching this film was Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And the other one was from my reading of The Terror, which was also
Terror's awesome.
Yeah, it's really good. And it's a TV show, but at the same time, I was reading the book. And so there's a lot of kind of naval jargon in it that was a little perplexing to me because obviously I wasn't really learned in that field. But you start to pick up on certain things. And this film was reminding me of a lot of scenes from that book I had been reading. So it was kind of familiar in that way. And they're very similar in tone for certain parts. And this film I would easily give also a 9, like a high 9. Like I was even debating a 10.
Yeah.
But
You can do 9.5 if you want.
All right, well, 9.5. But I think the only thing keeping it from a 10 for me is that it's not very easy to casually watch it.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to lose what is happening, and
have to
in a
be
way
focused
that's
on
like
it.
that's also a positive, because I think it's desperately trying to keep itself authentic. Mm-hmm. And naturally, if it's being authentic in this case, it's not going to be easy to follow because there's just so much context going on.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that the subtitles definitely helped
Oh,
me
yeah,
out
oh,
a
yeah.
lot in this.
Yeah,
I
for
definitely
sure.
had to put those on.
So
It
didn't have
enhanced
it
my
on.
enjoyment, honestly.
I think I need to give a shout out to a character that I neglected to mention, but he was kind of I really vibed with him a lot, was Killick.
Oh, yeah.
Their cook.
Oh,
I
so
loved
good.
all of his commentary, and he made me laugh every single time he spoke. He gave me life. But that being said, I really enjoyed this film, and I think it was very, very well done for the time. It's just unfortunate it was overshadowed by things like Lord of the Rings, which Lord of the Rings does deserve all my credit, but
It could
this is
lose to much less worthy.
Oh, definitely.
Films.
Yeah.
I'll say.
So this, I think they completed a film to the best of their ability, and I think it's worthy of a 9.5.
All right, Noah.
all right. So here goes. This movie, I just found completely amazing. I couldn't find a single flaw ever, and it just and like David said, it hits all of the right spots.
Yes.
It's just it's an amazing adventure. You have this I guess what you could say is a sort of villain, but it's really just, as far as plot goes, it's the
It's a white whale to his.
yeah, it's the
Yeah,
antagonist.
Captain
it's
Ahab.
it's the
that's right.
opposing force in a narrative. There's just every aspect about this movie I love. I like AJ. am very fond of naval or nautical tales.
Monte Cristo.
Exactly. And this one I had forgotten, hadn't really watched since I was 9. 9. Exactly. And I didn't have a taste for movies really at that time. Well, perhaps some, but you put all that together with the environment setting, just being on a boat out at sea, the realism of everything, all the details, the character relations. It's just so amazing. It's heart-wrenching and heartwarming at many points throughout the movie, and I'm of the belief now, because of this movie, that just because something isn't as good as Lord of the Rings does not mean it doesn't deserve a 10.
Wow.
And I have to give this a 10.
Yeah.
And like just for example, there have been a number of movies that we've had to watch in the past in which my focus was, while it was on it and I can watch it actively, I wasn't intently attached to it.
Yeah.
And today I was really busy doing all this stuff, but I couldn't keep my eyes off it. I had to look down to do stuff, but I was like, no, I have to
I can,
I have to keep looking back up and just.
I can say he 100%.
Even while I was I was trying to fine tune
Yeah.
certain things, and
I do think that as
it
you've
was
grown up,
great.
this movie has definitely appealed to your sense of aesthetics.
it really does.
Maybe you should read the books.
I
I think you should.
after watching this,
I do
I was,
recommend it.
I was just thinking, man, I really need to read these
Also,
books.
to jump off that too, it ages well. This movie came in 2003.
It's 'cause
Practical
it's
effects,
it's an
man.
authentic.
Insane.
It's because it's an authentic period piece. There's nothing to that cannot age well.
Well, they were
Yeah.
dedicated
it's
to the
like-
production aspect of such things.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it doesn't buy into any of the modern trends of like showing slow mo or having like
Oh, yeah.
weird audio edits
Yeah,
that
it
are
could have
just
came out this year, and I would still love it.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, think about if this had been converted into a TV series. I
don't
think
get Andrew excited.
honestly, today
Dang it.
that would have been incredibly successful.
Yeah, I actually weirdly, as much as I love it, a TV series,
Mm-hmm.
I like this being a more cinematic
I
kind
agree.
of
I mean, I do too.
film type thing.
But I mean, that's what I mean by today, because a lot of TV series are getting more of that focus.
yeah,
where
like
So-
you
there's
mentioned
more.
earlier, The Terror.
Yeah, The Terror,
yeah.
for
Okay.
instance, is a very good example.
Another a good way that they could do that if they were to do a series. I am actually of the opinion that I do like it as a
Yeah.
single movie
Yeah.
more.
Well, it's like I don't
But-
want to switch out the actors.
Yeah, exactly. But if you did it in the same style as perhaps how the Netflix series release everything at once, where it's kind of just a whole movie, but they have
Right.
so much content
Like
that
The Witcher.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that I mean, I like The Witcher. The Witcher's good.
This
but,
isn't really comparable to
it's-
The
It
Witcher,
isn't.
though.
Yeah, but if they do, I'm just explaining about the fact that
Yeah.
it's one whole thing rather than it being like a bunch of different even though it's an episodic tale overall. From the standpoint of the books, I think it being viewed as one whole thing
Yeah.
is important.
Yeah.
All right, so before we go to AJ's review, I will give my brief thoughts on the movie. I don't know what you guys see. This movie's not really that good.
You know what? I take everything back. I hate it. 7. Oh wait,
Put it
wait.
off the podcast.
I'm just
Fail.
I was just kidding. This movie is amazing. I think it's the best movie we've covered thus far on the
Mm-hmm.
podcast. And granted, we've covered some stinkers, but we have covered a few good movies. So I think it's still saying a little bit of something. This movie is I love its commitment to authenticity. I love how it respects the author's vision, but kind of carves its own path. I love the relationship between Russell Crowe's character, Captain Aubrey, it's Aubrey, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And Maturin. It just pulls all of these elements together perfectly, and I just succeeds in every single facet. I don't know. I can't even describe how much I like this
Yeah.
movie.
See, it's hard when you
See,
get
it's-
on it yourself. You
Like
stumble
for me,
over how
it's
many
very
things you
hard
like
for
about
me to
it.
decide, because I still want to give it a 10, but I'm also like 9.5 sounds right.
And it makes me hate the younger version of myself that thought this was boring, because every part of this movie is just They're
You can't take it out.
they're
Yeah.
spinning so many plates at the same time,
you-
just trying to be authentic at the same time as being entertaining to an audience, engaging,
You
and
feel the danger and you feel the rousing speeches and you
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
it's
and the
like you're
performances
there
the
and you're like
performances are top notch.
one of the crew.
And I said it already, but I think just the main relationship between these two main characters is what sells this movie completely. I think it's just so, I don't know.
Hashtag bromance goals.
Yes, exactly. it just tugs at the heartstrings. There are a
modernize it.
couple times in this
In a
movie where
shameful
I almost
manner.
cried just. And
Yeah, it's touching.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
And its ability to make you care about characters that you barely even know.
I know.
In just a
Yeah.
split second. Is,
Gosh, Mr.
Yeah.
Hallam, I
Yeah.
could
It's
not
just-
get over
It's
that.
just so strange because The Gladiator for the longest time had been my favorite Russell Crowe movie, and now
Not
this
Les Mis?
this knocked it off of its top spot.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I like this movie better than I like The Gladiator, and I love The
wow.
Gladiator.
You like this more than Gladiator.
That's a hot take.
I did.
Interesting.
Yes. Gladiator, I'd give a 9.
Yeah, so I think it's a grand adventure, and Peter Weir really brought this story to life, and I feel like the best possible way that it could have been. And combining two stories is also no small task.
Oh, yeah.
It just is so tragic that we didn't get to see more of these films, and I think it's going to be hard for a movie in the future to make me feel more sad about it not getting a sequel. At least with the same crew behind the movie. For this movie, I would give it a 9.5,
Yeah.
Wow.
which is easily my highest score so
Oh,
far.
yeah.
Man, I'm over here with the
think mine
low end
too.
on a 9.
So Andrew,
get
I'm
with
gonna
amazing
kick it
movies.
over to you.
Well, I'm glad this movie is well received.
Yeah.
So,
Oh
Good
yeah.
pick.
where to start? Let's
Sorry,
just
I
say
was low
let's name drop Billy Boyd for a second.
We
Yeah.
haven't
We
touched
didn't
it.
talk about him.
We were trying to
Yeah,
mention him
Good year
somewhere.
for Billy Boyd.
yeah. I'm not even gonna try to segue in. Let's just say Billy Boyd, obviously Lord of the Rings aspect or reference.
Yeah.
He's the coxswain here, Barrett Bondon. Also a good performance. So I picked this movie for kind of what I talked about, being drawn to the nautical tales and like everyone else. Really impressed by, and surprisingly so, because most of us didn't really see this in theaters. We didn't expect to come away with such an emotional response to this movie, where on the surface it seems boring. It seems like it's not a popcorn kind of flick where we're just mindless action kind of thing, and that's probably one of the things that held it back from succeeding and producing a sequel. And really, technically, they tackled a lot here that goes unnoticed. The performance by both Crowe and Bettany were top notch.
Yes.
Highlights of their career for sure, and establishing that on-screen chemistry, drawing you into their friendship and camaraderie, and also drawing you into the experience of the crew of the HMS Surprise here under the command of Captain Jack Aubrey. It really immerses you, even things like the camera swaying back and forth, putting you into the feel of being on a ship. Things really just draw you into this movie, and it was masterfully done for a movie called Master and Commander.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things to unpack in this movie that really are kind of subtle and go unappreciated. I feel like it's just even the design of the ships itself, creating the practical effects, creating
Actual
design.
ships. Yep.
Yeah, and true to the design of described in the books and in real life as well. It's kind of a challenge to tackle something based on history, but also draw a general audience. I think they really did a good job at pulling it off and investing you emotionally. So with all that said, I obviously enjoyed this movie. Just to put out criticism just for the sake of listing it, I would say biggest thing for me is kind of an ignorance is bliss almost kind of thing, where having read the O'Brien novel and the source material, there is something left to be desired from Stephen Maturin's character that is in the books that isn't portrayed at all or even really referenced in the film, and the fact that Stephen Maturin develops and turns out to be a spy and intelligence agent.
Oh, really?
Which would be a huge game changer in the intrigue department and kind of excitement factor that all of y'all did not know about. So
I will say, though, sorry to interject. In this whole movie, when I first watched it, there were weird things about it in the beginning where I thought he might have been a spy. I'm not even gonna
Liar.
that's awesome.
I'm not lying.
That's
Liar.
awesome that you saw that. And for the uninitiated, it's kind of good that if you haven't read the books, that you can really see this as its own work. But if you know that, hey, Stephen Maturin he's the start of every chapter in the books. He's writing letters in cipher.
A spy
and
for who? The
The
French?
French.
for the
Well, the
the
American.
British.
Well,
For the British.
Oh, for the
So
British.
he has a background of the Irish Revolution, and there's a whole back history in Bonapartism, French Revolution, the American Revolution, him being disillusioned with those ideals, and then eventually working for the British Royal, the government, essentially, and his mission as the crew not only a surgeon, he's an intelligence officer. He gets tortured in Brazil, in Far Side of the World. So there's that whole aspect that was completely untouched in this movie.
My mouth is agape right
that
now.
y'all appreciate this movie as its own thing without that. But knowing that, coming into seeing this movie is like, wow, they really kind of dropped the ball on that, where I wish they tried to incorporate that a little bit. I know it's a lot it's kind of maybe they wanted to not bite off more than they could chew.
I'll say in this movie's favor, though, knowing now that it doesn't get a sequel, that excluding that is almost more in its favor as a solo piece.
I think the interesting thing about what you just said, though, is it brings to light something that was mentioned in the beginning of the film, of where Jack Aubrey is mentioning, how are they able to find us every single time? Like, it seems weird that they're able to lock in on our target. And then the person that responds to him is the doctor saying, well, they do have spies.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
So
there were a couple little sprinkles
Yeah.
of that kind of thing. And also, so just from a character development standpoint, they did a good job for the general audience, for the people who read the books. The character development kind of falls flat, honestly, for both Aubrey and Maturin. I wish they kind of threw in a little bit of flashback where they jump you straight into the story. I wish they threw a little bit of flashback to how Maturin and Aubrey met, which is kind of an iconic scene. The first chapter of the book, they almost look they're about to fight each other. They almost come to blows over just being rude to each other, and then things turn around and they become best of friends kind of thing. That's kind of the main detractor for this film, and that's, like I said, kind of an ignorance is bliss kind of thing. So if you didn't read the books, and maybe that's to O'Brien, the author's credit, is his great development and his writing style and that kind of thing. That's what keeps it from being a perfect 10 in my eyes. So I'll land at a 9.5, simply because this movie really speaks to me. They did a lot of things wrong, and other nitpicks to keep it from perfection. There were a couple of scenes. I know this won an Oscar for cinematography, and shots were great. There were a couple of scenes. There's like, did the guy carrying the gimbal sneeze? Like there are a couple of shots. Where like, what the heck happened to the camera?
And the final battle, which we're kind of observing right now, it gets a little convoluted. Where maybe that's the intention, but you don't really know who's killing who.
And that lends to the hecticness of the actual experience in real life.
Yeah, this is when shaky cam was perfect.
Right, but it's like also, like I said, like the camera is like on this track, whatever, panning this shot, and then suddenly it's like, hey, the wind must have blown or something. It's just like, what? That didn't get edited out.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Wow.
Maybe that's just being overly critical of something that actually was spectacular. And obviously the other detriment, if you can even call it that, is the lack of mass audience appeal. And maybe that's because the mass audience as we know it today is completely spoiled by things that are completely broken down for you and very accessible, very popcorn popping type films.
Which we'll get into.
Yeah,
here.
just almost overly simplistic. So it's kind of hard to put it in that time frame. And we talked about earlier, this is almost ahead of its time. This came out in 2003 and competed against Return of the King.
Yeah.
So the fact that it stands the test of time in that respect, for people who are discerning, not to sound elitist, but who are looking for those subtleties instead of just something that you throw on the TV and can just kind of enjoy mindlessly.
Yeah, it's a thinking man's big budget movie, I guess.
I really wish that they did a great job with Russell Crowe and Jack Aubrey. I just wish they gave a little bit, just a smidge more development to Maturin's character, because as the books progress, he really kind of almost overshadows or takes the spotlight from Aubrey in terms of depth of character.
I feel like maybe if they had the chance to make more movies,
that
could
that kind of leads into the franchise aspect of things. So I'll leave it at that. So let's say, without being overly long-winded, we'll say 9.5.
All right. Yep. I already logged it.
Solid 9.5.
Wow, that is our highest scoring film so far. David 9, Irina 9.5, Noah 10, AJ 9.5, and my score 9.5 as well.
It evens out at 9.5.
Not quite. Well, yeah,
should.
you're right. You're
How
right.
did I do that? How did I end up at a 9 and being the lowest?
Because you were pretty enthusiastic. I think you're
I-
still shell shocked from your Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, so you're just
Yeah.
lowballing
So I think-
slightly under.
David,
way to
David,
shoehorn that
Well,
one
here's
in
the-
there.
David,
Here,
I think
I
you were
can-
just afraid of making it just too far above Tomb of the Dragon
I hate
Emperor.
you
Yeah.
all.
All right, so let's talk about this franchise, or in this case, wannabe franchise. What do you guys think this movie cost?
Give us budget.
Yeah, budget was $150 million
Whoa.
for this movie, which was big
All
budget for
practical?
the time. Mostly practical, yes.
150. Wow.
How do you guys think this movie did
I'm gonna guess 330.
worldwide?
Yeah. No.
No, this is always worldwide.
I know. I every single time I just get stuck in this mindset
Right,
of.
it cost 150. There's no
US.
sequel.
I'm
Think
gonna say
about this.
250.
I'm
250?
gonna stick with my 330 worldwide.
330?
So this hit theaters in November
Yes.
against Return of the King.
Oh man, that's rough.
Return
That
of
is
the King, I
rough.
think, came out a little later.
December, right?
Yes.
But it was definitely being hyped for.
Yes.
Well, this is before school got out, so
So the movie came out on... Oh, man, come on.
November.
November 14th, 2003.
So just before then, it must have been.
Yeah, and Return of the King was in December.
Yeah.
So it wasn't directly assaulted by Return of the King, but close enough.
I mean, the hype aspect of it. Return of the King being the third movie of a trilogy, whereas the relatively unknown Master and Commander. So, yeah, like you said, hype aspect, kind of.
Yeah. Anyone else want to throw any guesses out there? You want me to reveal? No?
I'm sorry.
No.
What was that?
You already guessed.
Numbers.
So I'll just say it. The movie did $93 million domestically and $210 million worldwide.
Dang.
So
Oh,
David,
that
All right.
sucks.
close.
I'm
Man.
kind of upset that I won that one.
That's annoying.
That said, like a domestic total of $93 million for a period piece like this one is not that bad. It's just the cost of it really worked against it.
Yeah.
and for it, really.
Yeah, ultimately, it's no spoiler here. The reason this movie didn't get a sequel was for money reasons.
Yeah.
It was not overly successful money-wise. The director was quoted as saying that it did okay, but it just didn't really inspire much
Yeah.
interest in continuing the franchise, which I'm at least thankful that the movie had... It works on its own. Like, you can
Yeah.
watch it on its own, even though there is a tease for a sequel at the end. It's still a solitary experience.
Right.
Yeah, I'm of the mind that while in a perfect world we could have a sequel, but I would also be worried for that sequel because this is so good. It would be so easy to drop the ball.
If the same director did it, I would almost have total faith. He
Yeah.
Yeah.
showed that he really, really cared for
It's
making
true.
this a
It's
good
true.
movie.
It's
So,
true. But you
with-
never know what outlying
Yeah,
factors there
it's
could
true.
be.
It's true.
And yeah, it's like return on investment. It is hard to film a movie on a boat at sea.
Yeah.
Obviously, Disney's got the kind of power to do that with Pirates of the Caribbean, and also that has more of the mindlessness aspect of it going for it. And how many of those have they put out? And I don't even know what the titles
5.
are for them.
That said, this movie was by Fox, which is now owned by Disney.
Well, there you
Wow. Hey, so it's a Disney movie, guys.
But as far as like kind of franchise aspects of it go, I feel like something maybe also working against it is for this movie. So with the Aubrey Maturin novels, you have 20 of them completed. They cherry picked the biggest events out of those novels. So you have Master and Commander being the first book, Far Side of the World being the seventh book, and I think they pulled events from about 7 books total. So if you're looking across the source material to make other books and you've already cherry-picked the biggest events out of them,
Yeah.
you know, what are you left with to make another movie that's also going to excite people?
Yeah.
But also
Especially
stay
when
true to
you're
the
kind of
books.
already labeled as maybe not a boring movie, but more of a less accessible movie,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah, you kind of...
I think it was
So they almost painted themselves into a corner
right.
in that respect.
It was almost kind of a fish out of water because it seemed like a little delayed from what used to be popularly known as classics. Like it gave me a lot of Last of the Mohicans, Dances with Wolves, kind of like it belonged in that time. But just when this was released was alongside a lot of action-packed instant gratification films. So it was very hard for people to kind of go back to that slow-paced, like really focusing on all the details and appreciating them. So it's really, really sad, actually.
Yeah. So I think Russell Crowe has tweeted interest in continuing this.
Yeah, in 2010, he actually he was trying to campaign for people to vote for a sequel.
Kind of a gauging interest in it, kind of thing. There's definitely a wealth of source material they could pull from
That will never happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's also just because the way the audience's tastes have changed. You know, we're all used to, you know, Avengers, everything's, you know, built up to kind of like, not to devalue it, but that more immediate gratification, popcorn, you know.
Yeah. This movie would only, a sequel to this would only have a chance in the winter season, where awards movies are more popular and have longer legs, which is when this first movie released. And judging by performance right now that I mentioned earlier of 1917, which will cross over the 100 million mark domestically, you know, it is feasible for a sequel to this to be successful. If I were a big studio, I wouldn't feel confident in betting on it.
So fortunately, you've got 20 books to read if you're interested in this story.
Yeah.
So those of you who are book readers.
What if I'm not a book reader?
David, you said you were interested in it.
I am very interested.
So
but I'm also
the books
bad at reading.
themselves are not that long at all. Like Master and Commander, the first book, really only touches on, you know, very minuscule amounts of this story. There's a lot that's new to this story that you haven't seen in the film.
About how many pages?
And
in the book?
O'Brien does a really good job of immersing you in the story, where things can. A lot of nautical tales really go over your head with a lot of the jargon and describing ships and stuff like that. O'Brien actually does a masterful job of treating you as a novice without treating you like you're dumb.
Yeah.
And introducing you to that.
Well, that's
that
good
world.
for me.
So,
All right. Let's talk about the reviews real quick before we close this out. Do you think this was a well-received movie? Do you
Yes.
know already? Yes.
Yeah.
I
haven't seen it, but I know it's.
I think
has
it was
to.
I know
well
it
received, but just not by
did.
a lot of people.
Yeah. So Rotten Tomatoes score was 85% through critics.
What?
With, wait, and 80% from audiences. Yes.
This is like. What? What is wrong with
I
people?
think that
It was
I
before
understand
its
that. I think it makes
time.
sense.
Yes.
Or a little after.
or
its
after,
time.
yeah.
Depending, yeah.
Metacritic was an 81%, which is actually very high
Yeah,
for Metacritic.
yeah.
That indicates universal
Honestly,
acclaim.
80% for anything is pretty good.
Yeah, and IMDb score of 7.4. So it was definitely not its critical reception and its audience reception. I would feel like overall was not a reason for this movie's franchise failure. I feel like audiences were slightly more indifferent towards it than critics. Critics seemed to really lap it up. But so maybe that kind of contributed to it a little bit.
I think it's just kind of the nature of a historical drama.
Yes. But overall, this is one of those ones that's kind of sad because I feel like it was just on the cusp of, warranting a sequel. Like it just did just under the amount that it needed to get. And even still, I don't feel like Peter Weir would have done a sequel. He was already hesitant to direct this one, but he finally did it for some reason. Like he saw some ship or something and he wanted to do it. But it is kind of sad that we don't get a second shot at this franchise.
I do. I agree, but at the same time, I love that they left it open. Like, oh man, there's so much adventure going on. Even though you're not going to see it, it's happening.
Yeah, I'm at least so grateful that this movie ended on a note where it's like it doesn't need a sequel. You know,
Yeah.
it can survive on its own.
Yeah.
It's not a movie like Warcraft that we watched a few weeks ago
Hey.
where it's like, oh, this movie
I
has
agree.
to have a sequel, but
I
it doesn't
agree.
get
But
one.
it
I agree.
tanked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also good that it doesn't wear out its welcome like Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
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 I could watch
Pirates of
this
the Caribbean,
movie.
man.
I
So-
could watch this movie again like this week and still be happy watching
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So,
I know.
so
It's
it's not
weird.
it is not a tragic narrative for this movie.
No.
I'm happy that we have it and it can exist on its own. I would have liked to see what a sequel would look like for this movie.
Oh, yeah.
I'm honestly curious.
Read the books.
Yes.
And I will.
All right, so that closes out our episode on Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World. Thank you, AJ, for selecting that. Next week, AJ has submitted our next pick, League of of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yes.
Yeah, a movie I've not seen since it came out, and I'm
actually kind of
Same here.
nervous.
I am nervous too. I'm
Yeah.
expecting a close to like Van Helsing
Well,
experience.
yeah,
so-
and I know the movie wasn't received well, and so like you, I haven't seen it since it came out really, and almost have a idealistic. Well, I saw it as a young person,
Yep.
and being enamored by Sean Connery, so I'm nervous to see it
Who
with more of a
isn't?
critical eye.
yeah, we will discuss it, and we will see you guys next week.